We can start with the state of many developed economies. Now, while they continue to grow in overall economic terms, if not as quickly as they once did, they have too often failed to share the benefits of that growth. In many countries, while the very wealthiest have grown consistently wealthier, the rest have seen little or no real rise in their incomes or their living standards over decades. Inequalities that deepened with the great deregulating reforms of the 1980s and 90s have become a permanent feature of these economies, not a brief moment of pain. It certainly was the experience in New Zealand. As a small country, we are often at the forefront of global trends because we can move faster and sometimes further than our larger counterparts. And that was evident in the way that we embraced and sometimes pioneered the free market reforms of the 1980s and 90s. Starting in 1984 through to the 1990s, we removed regulations that were said to hamper business. We slashed subsidies, we transformed the tax system, dramatically cut public spending, massively reduced welfare benefits paid to the sick and those caring for children and the unemployed. Now, we can argue whether those regulatory reforms were necessary, but regardless, the numbers and outcomes, they speak for themselves. Within 20 years, my country lost its status as one of the most equal in the OECD. While incomes at the top doubled and GDP grew steadily, incomes at the bottom stagnated, and child poverty more than doubled. Now, I was a child back then, but I remember clearly how society changed. I remember nothing of Rogernomics, of course. I was 5. I was not the Doogie Howser of politics. But I do remember the human face, especially the kids who didn't have the basics. Now, this experience is not New Zealand's alone. It happened in many countries, often with deeper inequalities and more persistently stagnant real wages. And the change hasn't always been reversed yet. In fact, more recent trends have added new dimensions to the problem. The financial crisis of a decade ago did not turn into another Great Depression, thankfully, but it has led to ongoing upheaval in the global political economy. High debt and prolonged low interest rates have inflated asset values, widening inequalities in new ways. Most obviously for countries like Australia and New Zealand, booming housing markets have put home ownership out of reach for a growing number of young people, especially when coupled with the debt many accumulate trying to further their education. That same generation is now facing the prospect of new challenges, climate change and digital transformation, putting people out of work now and in the future. And just to add fuel to that already somewhat grim picture, new forms of media and communication are changing how we understand what is happening to our societies and how we connect with each other. This change has opened up the world in one sense, but it's also had the opposite effect of making us more distant at times, more entrenched. Stunningly, our most connected generation in New Zealand, our young people, have also been found to now be our loneliest.